Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. Welcome to my review and deep dive into the second episode of the second season of Short Treks, The Trouble with Edward. This episode is the second of three promised to feature Pike and his crew, although this one only tangentially features Pike right at the very beginning of the story, as he bids farewell to a science officer, Lynn Lucero, who's taking command of the science vessel USS Cabot. Before she leaves, he gives her a warning that not everyone might be up to her level, to which she responds some of them might even be smarter. Unfortunately, she should have heeded Pike's words, as she soon meets Edward Larkin, one of the Cabot scientists who's working on breeding an animal as a food source for a famine-stricken planet. The creatures he's breeding are, of course, familiar to Star Trek fans. They are the Tribbles, apparently at this point slow to breed and very easy to kill. His experiments, however, would cause them to multiply quickly, turning into the Tribbles we know and love from later Star Trek series. Put off by his bumbling manner and inability to answer some basic questions about his experiments, Lynn Lucero assigns him to a different department, telling him to put a pin in the Tribble work for now. Larkin decides to take matters into his own hands, however, and proceeds with the experiment. This leads to a lab breach in which the Tribbles begin multiplying profusely, soon taking over the entire vessel. As the episode ends and the crew is unable to get a handle on the Tribble problem thanks to the transporters going offline because of the Tribbles getting into the ship's circuitry, the captain is forced to abandon ship with her crew. Edward Larkin does not accompany her and is seemingly killed aboard the Cabot. Answering for the loss of the Cabot, Captain Lucero faces a panel of Starfleet admirals having to explain why she lost the ship, ultimately giving the reason that Edward Larkin was an idiot. The Short Treks episodes have obviously been an experiment with a different type of storytelling in the Star Trek universe. This has at times worked quite well. I think, for example, the episode Calypso and others, and other times not so well. In my opinion, Runaway was a little bit of a lackluster episode. This one is definitely garnering mixed reviews online. It seems you either love it or you hate it. There are a few people that fall in between, but for the most part, this has been a very polarizing episode. For myself, I do have to say, I actually really enjoyed this episode. The first time watching it, I was a little unsure. I kind of was a little bit taken aback by the tone of it, and it struck me as a little odd and a little not in keeping with, Star Trek's tone, whatever that is. But Star Trek has, of course, done comedy before. And on a second watch, I found myself actually really enjoying it once I knew what to expect from this episode. And that's not to say that my standards were lowered. It's just that I was in the right mindset to be more receptive to what the episode was about. The first time around, I did laugh at a few parts, but for the most part, I just was struggling to kind of get my head around what the episode really was. Watching it a second time and multiple times since then with various people, I really found myself enjoying it, the absurdity of it, and even the cringe humor, which I know a lot of people don't like, but I think H. John Benjamin really carries off well in this episode. If I had one criticism, it might be that Larkin seemed almost a bit too sympathetic in the episode. I think the episode is really trying to make him to be unsympathetic and bumbling and a total idiot. But watching it, I do feel a little bit for this guy, and Captain Lucero doesn't really give him a fair chance. Again, it's a short format. You have to tell the story quickly, but he was obviously very insubordinate and highly incompetent and just an absolute menace, but he is kind of pushed a little bit by Captain Lucero, who could have handled the situation a little better. I've worked with people like Edward Larkin in the past, and it doesn't take much to really push them into doing some really stupid things, in my opinion, of course. So it's definitely a difficult situation, and I think everything kind of contributed to making it the worst possible situation. There's some things that I absolutely loved. For some reason, this device, this kind of vacuum that's sucking up Tribbles, makes me think of something from Dr. Seuss or The Simpsons or something ridiculous like that, and the little like thump sound effect as it's picking up the Tribbles. I really did enjoy this and found myself laughing out loud at a lot of it. I know that might be disappointing to some out there who really didn't like it, and I understand the reasons why people wouldn't like this, but I really did find it a lot of fun. I would say the ending piece, now if you stick after the credits, there's a little bit tacked onto the end, kind of Star Trek's first post-credits scene ever, and it's definitely out there. This kind of 80s style cereal advertisement for Tribbles. It's ridiculous. It's like nothing that Star Trek has ever done before. And again, this was something I really didn't know how to feel about. And then I watched it with a friend of mine who kind of pointed out, and he's involved in video production and has worked on some productions and that sort of thing. And he was kind of telling me the number of steps that would have to go through to be, scripted and filmed and approved. The kids with the Starfleet uniforms, they had to be, tailored to them and fit, and all the various people that had to put in work into creating that little ridiculous commercial at the end. And every step along the way, the people involved approved it, said, okay, let's do it. It's crazy. It's nuts. Star Trek has never done anything like that before, but they committed, and I kind of have to give them credit for that. It's so wild and just not something I would have ever expected to see in Star Trek, but that's not a bad thing. I think if we're treating these short treks as what they are, these experiments in different ways of doing things, I think there's a lot of credit to be had for taking this route and making the decisions they did. So tipping my hat to the producers for that one. Well done. Maybe not the decisions I would have made. Maybe it's going to rub people the wrong way. But if you just sit back, relax, and enjoy it as a piece of fun Star Trek. And again, Star Trek has done this in the past. Last year's short Trek episode, The Escape Artist, was nothing but a comedy from beginning to end. There's no deeper message there. There's no deeper meaning. It's just ridiculousness, and that's what this was. I guess you could take the lesson away from it about how to treat coworkers and how to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen, but I think you don't need to look too deep into it. It's just a ridiculous amount of fun. Okay, let's go into the deep dive on continuity and canon connections in this episode. So first of all, the USS Cabot, we see at the beginning of the episode, is a McGee-class starship like the USS Shran that we see in the second Discovery episode, Battle at the Binary Stars. We also see at the beginning of the episode the Enterprise as Captain Lucero beams to the Cabot. The Enterprise, unlike the Discovery, has only one transporter console, keeping in continuity with what we see in the episode The Cage and future episodes going forward. One of the crew members aboard the Cabot is a Trill. We don't know if she's joined or unjoined. Now, the Trill may have been a little secretive at this time because Dr. Crusher and TNG didn't know about their nature, but they were certainly known to the Federation at this time. You may remember that a certain Trill by the name of Emily Dax had a relationship with Dr. Leonard McCoy when he was a student at Ole Miss. We get a briefing room scene in which you can catch a glimpse of a three-sided view screen, much like the ones that you see on the Enterprise in the original series and in last season's Discovery finale, Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2. Edward Larkin, when he's introducing the Tribbles, says that they hail from the planet Iota Geminorum 4, which is actually the home planet of the Tribbles that Phlox mentioned in the Enterprise episode The Breach. Now, in that episode, Phlox says that they reproduce quite prodigiously, while in this episode we see that Edward Larkin causes them to reproduce really quickly. Now, this could be a continuity error, and I freely admit that it is obviously one that maybe they didn't take into account when writing this episode. However, fans out there have written this off by explaining that they reproduced quite prodigiously, just not as fast as we see later on. So a little bit of fudging there, but it works if you squint. Edward gives the scientific name of the Tribbles as Tribolusus ventricosus. However, on some deep background information on a screen in Keiko O'Brien's classroom in Deep Space Nine, we learned that the Tribbles' name was Polygeminus Grex. Now, again, the same site that kind of fudged the data about Phlox's view of their reproduction, also said that once their DNA had been altered by Edward Larkin, they had been rechristened Polygeminous Grex. Again, a bit of a fudge, kind of explaining away a little canon error, but also this is just something that was on a computer screen in the deep background, so a little forgivable, but another little bit of a canon slip there. We get a number of homages and call-outs to the original Trouble with Tribbles episode. First of all, the captain in her ready room sits on a Tribble, much like Kirk does on the bridge in The Trouble with Tribbles. We get a callback to McCoy's line that they're born pregnant when the Trill crew member on the Cabot says the same about the Tribbles. And of course, various shots such as this one with the Tribbles pouring out of the storage compartment on the Cabot, reminiscent of many shots from the original Trouble with Tribbles. Also, one other side note, the use of the Bing Crosby song, Johnny Appleseed. When you watch the episode again after having learned that Larkin used his own DNA to alter the DNA of the Tribbles, some of the lyrics of that song take on a bit of a darker meaning. That's all I'm going to say about that. Just rewatch that with that in mind, and you'll see what I mean. Well, I have to say, this was definitely a different episode, but like I said, I really did enjoy it. H. John Benjamin in Star Trek, that just blows my mind. I love the guy in Archer and Bob's Burgers, and seeing him in Star Trek was a bit of a special treat, so I was really happy about that. Also, the woman who plays Captain Lucero, actress Rosa Salazar, who you may know from Alita Battle Angel. I haven't seen that movie myself, but I really did enjoy her performance in this episode. I thought she was very good in that role, and this is a character that I don't know how or where or when, but I would love to see again at some point, possibly in some sort of future Captain Pike series or maybe the Section 31 series. But in any case, I hope she bounces back from this. She made some poor decisions, and her first outing as captain didn't go very well, but I hope there's a place for her in Starfleet that can make use of her talents, because I'd love to see her again. Anyway, what did you all think of The Trouble with Edward? Let me know your actual opinions. I know some people didn't like it, and I do want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks, of course, to the Patreon supporters for all of their help. And thanks everyone else for liking, sharing, and subscribing, and just watching. And until next time, as always, live long and... Oh, shit.